The relentless pounding of rain against the cabin's wooden roof was all Abigail Lawrence could hear as the water rose inch by inch across her floor, seeping through the cracks in the walls that she'd meant to repair before winter came. It was 1875 in the Montana Territory, and she had never felt more alone until the heavy knock at her door changed everything. Abigail sloshed through the ankle-deep water, her soaked nightdress clinging to her legs. The cabin was dark save for her nearly drowned lantern, its light flickering weakly against the gloom. When she pulled open the door, she found herself face to face with a tall figure silhouetted against the storming night. "I brought fire, food, and shelter," said a deep voice as the man stepped forward, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "Saw your cabin from the ridge. Rivers breached its banks." The stranger's face came into view as lightning split the sky-strong jawline, eyes the color of the Montana sky on a clear day, and a face weathered by sun and wind. He couldn't have been more than 30, broad-shouldered and carrying a pack on his back. "I'm Matthew Keller," he said, extending a hand. "Most folks call me Matt." Abigail hesitated before taking his hand. "Abigail Lawrence. My friends call me Abby. Miss Lawrence, we need to get you to higher ground. This valley's flooding fast." She glanced back at her home, small and humble but built by her own hands after her father passed. "Everything I own is here. And it'll all be underwater by morning if we don't move now," Matt said, his voice gentle but urgent. "Grab what you can carry. I've got horses waiting." Abigail nodded, making quick decisions about what to save. She threw her father's pocket watch, a small box of letters, a photograph, and a change of clothes into a sack. Matt helped her gather a few more essentials before they stepped out into the deluge. 2 horses stood waiting, their heads bent against the rain. Matt helped Abigail onto one, tying her bundle securely before mounting his own. They rode away from the cabin, the water already rising past the porch steps. The journey up the ridge was treacherous. Twice Abigail's horse nearly lost its footing on the slick ground, but Matt's steady hand guided them both. At the crest of the hill stood a small shepherd's hut, abandoned years ago but sturdy enough to provide shelter. Inside, Matt quickly built a fire in the stone hearth while Abigail stood shivering in her wet clothes. Without a word, he handed her a blanket from his pack and turned his back to give her privacy. "Thank you," she said, wrapping herself in the rough wool and letting her soaked nightdress drop to the floor. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Matt nodded, his expression somber as he unpacked provisions. "Been working cattle at the Hollister Ranch 2 miles east. Saw the river rising and remembered there was a cabin down in the valley. Couldn't just ride on knowing someone might be in trouble." As the fire grew, casting dancing shadows across the hut's walls, Matt produced jerky, hard biscuits and coffee from his pack. He heated water in a small pot and handed Abigail a steaming cup. "It's not much," he said apologetically. "It's more than I had an hour ago," she replied, taking the cup gratefully. The warmth spread through her fingers, and for the first time since the rain began, she felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. "How long have you been out here alone?" Matt asked, settling across from her by the fire. 3 years, Abigail answered, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Pa died of pneumonia in '72. The claim was in his name, but I stayed on. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away." Matt nodded, understanding the hardship without her having to explain. In this territory, survival was a daily battle, doubly so for a woman alone. "You're from back east," he observed, not a question but a statement. Abigail looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" A small smile crossed his face. "Your hands, they've seen work, but they started soft, and you still have a touch of an accent. Boston." "Philadelphia," she corrected, returning his smile cautiously. "Pa brought me west after Mother died, said there was nothing left for us there." She paused, studying him. "And you, Mr. Keller, where do you hail from?" "Texas originally, been moving north with the herds for years now." He poked at the fire. "Never stayed in one place too long." They fell into companionable silence, the storm raging outside while they sat in the small pocket of warmth and safety. Abigail found herself studying the cowboy when he wasn't looking the way his hands moved with practiced efficiency, the quiet confidence in his posture. Morning brought a temporary break in the rain and a view of devastation. From the ridge, they could see the valley below partially submerged, with Abigail's cabin standing in water up to its windows. "It might recede," Matt offered, standing beside her, "if the rain holds off." Abigail nodded, but they both knew the damage was done. Even if the water retreated, the cabin would be uninhabitable for weeks, possibly months. "I have some savings," she said quietly. "Enough to rebuild, I think." Matt turned to look at her, admiration in his eyes. Most people would be breaking down right about now. A sad smile crossed her face. "Would that help the water recede any faster?" he chuckled, the sound warm in the cool morning air. "No, madam, I suppose it wouldn't." "Then I'll save my tears for something they might fix," she replied, straightening her shoulders. Over the next 2 days, they watched the water level from their perch on the ridge. The rain returned intermittently, never as fierce as that first night, but enough to keep the river swollen. Matt rode to the Hollister ranch to let them know he was helping a stranded neighbor and returned with more supplies. On the third morning, Abigail woke to find Matt already outside, studying the valley with a spyglass. "Water's starting to drop," he reported when she joined him. "Another day or two, we might be able to reach your place." Abigail nodded, relief washing over her. The past days in the shepherd's hut had been surprisingly comfortable despite the circumstances. Matt was easy company, respectful of her space but attentive to her needs. They'd fallen into a routine of sorts, sharing meals and stories by the fire each evening. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Matt said that night as they sat before the hearth, their dinner of rabbit stew finished. "What was it like growing up there?" Abigail's eyes grew distant with memory. "Crowded. Noisy, but exciting too. There were theaters and libraries and shops filled with beautiful things from all over the world," she smiled. "Pa had a bookbinding shop. I used to sit and watch him work for hours, smelling the leather and glue." "You miss it," Matt observed. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I've found beauty here too, different, wilder, but just as real." She looked at him curiously. "And Texas, what was your life there?" Matt leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Ranch life. My father ran cattle outside San Antonio, 5 brothers, and I was the youngest. Pa expected us all to follow in his footsteps, but I wanted to see what lay beyond our land." A shadow crossed his face. "There was a girl too, Mary Beth Calloway. We were supposed to marry, but she chose my brother instead." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly. He shrugged. "It was for the best. James could offer her stability, a home. All I had was restlessness." "And now," Matt's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Now I'm not sure anymore." The following morning they rode down to assess the cabin. The water had receded enough to reach it, though mud still surrounded the structure like a moat. Inside was worse than Abigail had feared. The wooden floor was warped, furniture ruined, and the small stove she'd cooked on was caked with silt. Her vegetable garden was completely washed away. Matt stood beside her as she surveyed the damage, his presence steady and reassuring. "It can be fixed," he said quietly. "Not right away, but piece by piece." Abigail nodded, blinking back tears she'd promised herself she wouldn't shed. "I know." Without being asked, Matt began to work. He carried sodden furniture outside, shoveled mud from the floor, and examined the foundation with a builder's eye. Abigail worked alongside him, their bodies moving in rhythm as if they'd been doing this together for years. By dusk, the cabin was cleared but far from habitable. "We should head back to the hut," Matt said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool evening air. "Start fresh tomorrow." As they rode back up the ridge, Abigail found herself wondering what would happen when the cabin was restored. Would Matt simply tip his hat and ride away? The thought created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. Days turned into weeks as they worked to restore the cabin. Matt proved skilled at carpentry, replacing damaged floorboards and reinforcing walls weakened by the flood. Abigail replanted her garden, hoping for at least some late harvest before winter came. Word spread about her situation, and neighbors from miles around came to help when they could. Mrs. Hollister arrived with preserves and bread, clucking sympathetically over the damage. The Dawson brothers from the next valley brought lumber. Even Sheriff Taylor rode out to offer assistance. Through it all, Matt remained, his initial rescue extending into something neither of them put a name to. He moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse at the Hollister ranch to the shepherd's hut, making the daily journey to Abigail's cabin with her. One evening, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in fiery hues, Abigail found the courage to ask the question that had been hovering between them. "Why did you stay, Matt?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and earnest. "I told you I've been moving north with the herds for years. What I didn't say was that I never found what I was looking for." He turned to face her. Until now, Abigail's heart stuttered in her chest. "And what were you looking for?" "Purpose, peace." His eyes held her steadily. A reason to stop running. Before she could respond, he stood and walked to the edge of the porch. "I should be getting back. Dawn comes early." Abigail watched him ride away, her mind and heart in turmoil. She'd come west with her father seeking a new beginning, never expecting to find herself alone so soon. She'd built a life from the wilderness, proving to herself and others that she could survive. But surviving wasn't the same as living. The next day, Matt arrived later than usual. When he did, his expression was guarded, almost formal. They worked side by side repairing the roof, but something had shifted between them, a new tension that made their usual comfortable silence feel strained. "I've been thinking," Matt said finally, securing a shingle in place. "The Hollisters are driving a herd to Cheyenne next week. They've asked me to go along." Abigail's hands stilled. "Will you go?" He didn't look at her. "I haven't given them an answer yet." "I see." She resumed her work, ignoring the ache blooming in her chest. "It's good pay, I imagine." "It is." They finished the roof in silence, and when the day's work was done, Matt left earlier than usual, the wall between them seemingly higher than ever. Alone in the cabin that night, Abigail allowed herself to face the truth she'd been avoiding. Somewhere between the flood and the rebuilding, between shared meals and quiet conversations, she had fallen in love with Matthew Keller. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The following morning, she waited for him with growing anxiety. When he finally appeared, riding slowly down the path toward her cabin, she knew something had changed. His expression was resolved, as if he'd come to an important decision. Abigail met him at the edge of her property, heart pounding. "I need to say something," she began before he could speak. Matt dismounted, standing before her with his hat in his hands. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "When the flood came, I thought I'd lost everything, but then you knocked on my door offering fire, food, and shelter." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mingling in her gaze. "What I didn't realize was that you brought me something else too, something I didn't know I was missing." Matt stepped closer. "And what was that, Abby?" "Hope," she said softly. "Hope for a different kind of life than the one I've been living, not just surviving alone, but sharing with someone." She gathered her courage. "With you if you wanted that too." His face softened, the guarded look from the day before melting away. "I told the Hollisters no," he said quietly. "I'm not going to Cheyenne." "Why not?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Because for the first time since I left Texas, I've found a place that feels like home." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "But it's not this land or that cabin that makes it feel that way, Abby. It's you." The last barrier between them crumbled as he drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged without words. When they broke apart, both were smiling, the future suddenly bright with possibility. "I don't have much to offer," Matt said, still holding her close. "Just my hands, my heart, and a promise to never leave you facing a flood alone again." "That's more than enough," Abigail replied, her voice steady with certainty. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who happened through the valley. The ceremony took place on Abigail's porch, with neighbors gathered to witness. Mrs. Hollister cried, declaring it the most romantic thing she'd ever seen. Sheriff Taylor stood as Matt's best man, while the Dawson brothers' wives helped Abigail prepare. Their first year together brought challenges. Winter came early and harsh, testing their preparations. Spring brought its own trials when Matt fell from a horse and broke his arm, leaving Abigail to handle most of the farm work while he healed. But each difficulty faced together only strengthened the bond between them. With Matt's carpentry skills and Abigail's determination, they expanded the cabin, adding rooms in anticipation of a family. They acquired more livestock cattle from the Hollisters as payment for Matt's continued help during roundups, chickens from Mrs. Dawson, and 2 strong workhorses from a trader passing through. The next summer, another storm brought heavy rain to the valley. As they sat together watching the downpour from their secure, elevated home, Abigail felt Matt's arm tighten around her shoulders. "Thinking about the night we met?" he asked, sensing her mood. She nodded, leaning into his embrace. "If not for that flood, you might have ridden right past without ever knowing I was here." "I'd like to think our paths would have crossed eventually," Matt said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are just meant to be." The following spring, their family grew with the birth of their daughter, Emma Rose Keller, named for both their mothers. Watching Matt cradle their infant with hands that had once only known the rough work of the range filled Abigail's heart to overflowing. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Thomas James, completing their family. The cabin that had once nearly been lost to the floodwaters became a home filled with laughter, tears, arguments, and reconciliations, all the beautiful complexity of a life shared. On the 5th anniversary of the flood, Matt surprised Abigail with a special gift, a wooden box, meticulously crafted from the salvaged floorboards of her original cabin. "Open it," he encouraged, watching her trace the intricate carvings on its surface. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay her father's pocket watch, polished and repaired to working order. Alongside it was the small stack of letters she'd saved that fateful night, and the photograph of her parents she'd cherished. "How did you manage this?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes as she held the watch. "It hadn't worked since before Pa died. Took it to that clockmaker in Helena last month when I went for supplies," Matt explained. "Wanted you to have something to remember how our story began." Abigail carefully placed the treasures back in the box, then wrapped her arms around her husband. "I've never forgotten, not for a single day. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch just as they had in those early days. The valley stretched before them, peaceful under the moonlight, showing no signs of the devastation that had once transformed it. "Do you ever miss it?" Abigail asked. "The traveling, the freedom of moving with the herds." Matt considered the question seriously, his face thoughtful in the silver light. "Sometimes I miss the open sky, sleeping under the stars." He turned to her, taking her hand in his. "But I've found something better than freedom, Abby. I've found belonging." As the years passed, the Lawrence Keller homestead prospered. Matt's reputation as a skilled carpenter spread throughout the territory, bringing commissions for everything from furniture to church pews. Abigail started a small business selling preserves and baked goods, her recipes becoming famous as far as Helena. Emma grew into a spirited young woman with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. Thomas inherited Matt's height and Abigail's love of books, devouring every volume they could acquire. The valley that had once nearly destroyed Abigail's home became the foundation for a community. New settlers arrived, drawn by stories of fertile land and good neighbors. Matt helped many build their first cabins, while Abigail welcomed newcomers with practical advice and friendship. On their 20th anniversary, with their children grown and beginning their own journeys, Matt and Abigail stood once more at the ridge where they had watched the floodwaters recede all those years ago. "If you had told me that night what our life would become," Abigail said, "I wouldn't have believed it possible." Matt's arm encircled her waist, his touch as familiar and essential to her as breathing. "When I knocked on your door, all I had were the simplest things: fire to warm you, food to sustain you, shelter to protect you." He turned her to face him, his expression tender. "I never imagined you'd give me so much more in return." "What did I give you?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Everything, Abby," he said simply. "You gave me everything." As they looked out over the land they'd shaped together, the setting sun painted the mountains in the same fiery hues that had illuminated their first honest conversation. The home they'd built stood strong against the backdrop of wild Montana beauty, a testament to the power of love that began on a stormy night when a flood threatened to take everything, but instead delivered an unexpected gift. That night, lying beside her husband in the quiet darkness, Abigail whispered, "Do you remember what you promised me when we married?" Matt's fingers traced the curve of her cheek, still able to find her in the dark after all these years. "That you'd never face a flood alone again." "You've kept that promise," she said softly, "not just with water, but with every storm life has brought our way." His lips found hers, the kiss as sweet as their first. "And I always will, Abby, until my last breath." In the years that followed, the story of their beginning became legend in the valley, how a devastating flood had brought together two souls who might otherwise never have met, how love had bloomed amid destruction, how a simple knock on a door during a storm had changed the course of two lives forever. And through it all, through joys and sorrows, through the growth of their family and community, through the inevitable changes time brings, Matthew and Abigail Keller remained each other's constant. The fire he had brought that night never dimmed, the shelter they built together never faltered, and the nourishment they found in each other's company sustained them all their days.